This program is rated GE. Content carried in here is suitable for general family viewing.
Rights of children are important now, even as we continue to talk about the issues of the Constitution and also the Children Act 2022. Even as we are having cases of children dying due to preventable diseases, it shows a cause for national conversation as a nation. We're having more opportunities and more threats with cases of children celebrating their 5th birthday, but also in situations whereby they are marginalized, they're not having access to health care. The government is talking about the universal health coverage, but what does that contain in terms of access to health care for children? And that's why here at Law Matters, a show that is educative, informative, and offers legal aid solution to what we face on our day-to-day lives, we are focusing into the issues of right of access to health care for children. Remember, you can send in your feedback, your questions on this particular segment at KUTV Kenya on Facebook, at KUTV Kenya on YouTube, and at KUTV_Kenya on Twitter. My name is Irene Mwangi, but before we get into the nitty-gritties of this particular segment, let me allow my guest to introduce herself. Kindly.
Good evening. My name is Nyoka Benjobu. I am a lawyer working at a local NGO called Kellen. I work generally working on issues around the right to health with a particular focus on sexual reproductive health, women and children.
All right. Thank you so much, Wakili Nyokabi, for making time for this particular show. Perhaps before we get into the intricate issues surrounding the access to healthcare for children, what is the legal framework in terms of access to healthcare before the 2010 Constitution and before the rights, the Children Act 2022?
So, starting from pre-2010, we did not have a right to health within the Constitution, but we did have international treaties that spelled out what the right to health has been. Kenya is a state party to many of these treaties. So, for example, we've got the International Covenant on Economic and Social-Cultural Rights, where Kenya ratified in 1979 and is a party. We've got the Convention on the Rights of the Child, to which Kenya is also a state party. And we've got other regional instruments such as the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, the African Children's Charter, and the Protocol on the Rights of Women to the African Charter, which, while it focuses on women, actually does talk about women and children. Okay. And that's important because of the maternal health care aspects that, of course, affect children. Mm-hmm. So that was the sort of the international framework, which was still binding on Kenya, despite the fact that the right to health was not codified within the context of our constitution. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, we had the Children Act 2001, and before that, the Children and Young Persons Act, which provided certain social rights for children, but they were not as strong as we now see them under the current legal framework. In 2010, we came up with this transformative constitution, and we must remember that that constitution was actually intended to redress some of the gaps that were there pre-2010. Mm-hmm. And the constitution now has the right to health in a variety of ways. One, it talks about the provision of the right to the highest standard of health, the highest attainable standard of health, under Article 43(1)(a). Mm-hmm. And under the same article, Article 43(2), it talks about the right to emergency medical services or emergency health care. Mm-hmm. And those is supposed to be a progressive right, meaning that as time goes by, the right to health is supposed to continue. The state is supposed to keep taking positive steps to ensure that the right is completely fulfilled. Okay. We are 13 years post that constitution, so we should be very far by now. Okay. But in relation to children in particular, Under Article 43, 1C of the Constitution, there's the right to healthcare services, as well as other social determinants for health. Such as adequate nutrition, such as access to clean water. Those are what we call the social determinants of health, because those determinants directly impact healthcare provision. And now what is very important to note is that in relation to children, the right to health is not a progressive right, it's an immediate right, meaning the states right now, Kenya should be taking positive steps to ensure the provision of that right.
Okay.
So that's just like a global, just thinking about it. The current Children Act, we have the Children Act 2022, which came into force in July 2022, actually provides for certain rights to health for children, and that's in Section 16 of the Act. And it provides for the right to health, not just for the child, and not just in terms of like what the state is supposed to do, provision of a hospital, ensuring that the hospital is fully staffed, but even something as basic as information. Okay. Children have the right to healthcare information so that they're able to make responsible choices for themselves, so they can know what is going on with themselves or their bodies. And this also includes aspects such as mental health, because remember, the right to health is not just the absence of physical infirmity, it's also the highest standard of health actually involves mental health as well, or psychological health as well. So we have to think about it holistically, and courts have actually interpreted the right to mean that the most expansive interpretation has to be taken to ensure the full realization of the right.
All right. Now, looking into the Constitution and the Children Act 2022, can you say as a country we have a stable or a firm legal framework to protect the rights of a child in terms of access to healthcare?
I think we are definitely on the right path. We have a solid foundation in terms of what our constitutional provisions are. And the international human rights framework that I've just mentioned is fairly robust. Okay. And these are binding on Kenya still, because under Article 26 of the Constitution, the right to health is, it can be firmly incorporated within our legal framework. So we've got a good foundation. In my view, we still have some ways to go, because sometimes we do get restrictive policies or restrictive laws that can hinder access to the right to health. As it is under the Children Act, for example, we've got certain obligations that the state is supposed to take care of, as well as parents, because there's always a primary obligation for the parents. So that's why I say we are at a good point. We are a good starting point. What we must caution ourselves, however, is that there are certain exceptions that are given within the law. For example, requiring parental consent for all children. Those can hinder access to healthcare. And this is because we have to take into account two things. One, the peculiarities of the Kenyan nation. We are not resourcing healthcare enough. Children are affected just like everyone else whenever there's a pandemic, for example, whenever there's no water. And we know that the lack of economic resources can affect how children access healthcare services. But beyond that, we know that children are different in every space. So we've got some places with very young children who may be more vulnerable because of the situation that they find themselves in. In this country, we still have children who are heading homes or who are heading families. We've got children who are facing sexual violence at the hands of the people around them, the people who are supposed to take care of them. And what the law says is that certain services cannot be offered to those children without the consent of those very people who are violating them. So that's a legal and policy gap that we need to think about, because that affects the health of that child in terms of especially of the mental health and how they develop going forward. Another thing that we need to really think about is the right to health within the AAAQ framework. And so it's a World Health Organization standard that has been developed over time because of the international human rights framework through interpretation. And when we think about accessibility, we have to think about one, physical accessibility. So for example, our children with disabilities, including mental or learning the mental or learning challenges, are they getting access to healthcare services as they should, or are we just making sure that a hospital has 10 flights of stairs and anyone can walk up?
Okay.
That's something that we really, really need to think about, because we know that there are children who are being left behind. And I've talked about economic accessibility. The KDHS, Kenya Demographic and Health Survey, has shown us the statistics about how children who live in urban settings are affected more by certain diseases, especially, for example, like respiratory diseases, when compared to the children who live in, the rural areas.
Yeah.
That can be due to a variety of factors. It may be an educational question, and by the education also of the parent or the guardian actually has an outcome on the health care of that child.
Yeah.
And these are statistics that are in government records. So we need to think about accessibility also in that framework. Then we need to think about, the next thing is availability. Are children actually getting access to the ailments that are presenting themselves? Do we have enough medication, for example? We've had situations where there have been stockouts of drugs, and this, of course, affects how children access services. Under the law, like, for example, the Health Act, children below a certain age are actually supposed to access certain services for free, and women are supposed to access certain services for free because that affects child mortality rate. I can assure you, based on the work that I do, that that's not always happening. Okay. It's not happening everywhere. Even think about something as simple as immunization. The question is, are children getting all the immunizations that they need, or are they just getting the very minimum standard? So there are certain gaps in provision there. But of course, acknowledging that government has done certain things, but there's still a long way to go. The third A in the triple EQ, I've talked about accessibility, availability, is acceptability. So whenever anyone, children and adults, when you're receiving a healthcare service, it has to be acceptable in terms of the standards. Is it a medical service or a healthcare service that when the person goes to the healthcare facility, they feel that they are comfortable with how they've been treated? Are they a building that is fully equipped? Basically, is the level of standard of care, is it acceptable?
Okay.
And again, that varies depending on where you are, whether you're going to a private facility or a public health facility, and that should not be the case, because then it becomes a question of discrimination based on economic status, and that's just not right, because we must make sure that no child is left behind. And lastly is about the quality of service. So think about a situation where a healthcare provider has to attend to 15 children in a very short time frame. The quality of service that healthcare provider will be giving, no matter their best intentions, may not be of a quality service. Are we getting the latest drugs in the market that we can actually adequately treat people's ailments? Again, there are certain gaps there, and I mean, we can discuss them, but lack of drugs, those are significant concerns. Sometimes you get situations where the drugs are not of good quality, and that's a significant concern. So there are certain gaps where the level of service provision or state commitment to the right to health is not up to where it should be. The aspirational standard of the rise to the highest attainable standard is not necessarily being reached.
All right. You touched on the AAA key, which is part of the international treaties that Kenya has signed in terms of access to healthcare for children. Looking into the Kenyan setup, we have focused more on privatization of healthcare to the extent that even adults accessing healthcare, they will say people from poor backgrounds are marginalized because the public healthcare sector is lagging behind in terms of provision of healthcare. Now, when you're focusing into the children, some who are born into the urban slums, others who are in the marginalized areas, and we are looking into the issue of access to healthcare. How are we doing as a country, even as we are having legal frameworks that we have signed in terms of treaties and even the Constitution and the Act?
So, even as I come to answer your question, we must remember that the state duty in terms of the right to the highest attainable standard is twofold. Because one, there's a negative duty to not do anything that harms the right. And like I've said, because the right for health for children is immediate, the state is supposed to take positive steps to ensure that health service provision is not interrupted for children. One of the ways it can do this is by committing its own resources or by allowing other players, non-state actors, to come and step in. which has now seen us privatize a large part of our social services. This is a question of significant concern. It's under discussion even within the regional international human rights framework whether certain health services should be privatized. The challenge with privatization is that when we put a cost to accessing healthcare, it means that the most vulnerable in terms of access to socioeconomic resources will miss out, or they may not get quality services as they probably could have because again of the question of cost. So, and you'll see that way. I'll give an example, like in immunization. There are certain immunizations that are provided by the government free of charge. I think you just pay a small dispensing fee, but in certain private health facilities you can get a much better, they say it's child friendly, So you see, there's nothing wrong with going for the highest standard if that is what you can afford. But government must ensure the purpose of the immunization must be met. Are children actually accessing their immunization? Now, if you get to a situation where there are no vaccinations for the young children whose mothers can or whose parents cannot afford the higher end, then that becomes a violation of the right to health, because the state has failed in its positive duty to ensure that services are available, but has also failed because its omission has ended up negating directly the right to health for children. So whenever we think about privatization, we really need to really query what the aims of privatization are, and whether it's the least restrictive way that the state can actually attain the ensuring, that other non-state actors are playing. Because in the end, remember, the Constitution, the International Human Rights Framework, place the primary obligation of ensuring that standard of health, the highest standard, is actually placed on the state. It is the state to either commit its resources or ensure that non-state actors are not doing anything. Yes, one, that can step in, but secondly, that when they step in, they're not stepping in a way that is excluding certain sections of the population.
All right. Thank you, Akili. We'll stop at that. We're taking a short break, but once we come back, we'll be looking into the practicable examples in terms of access to healthcare, issues of sexual violence, teenage pregnancies, and also child abuse. Do stay with us. We'll be back with more.
They speak to play politics.
Kila mara yeye ananiwinda kama mnyama. Naambia yeye Mungu iko na sitarudi nyuma.
They speak words strong enough to change policy and the law.
We have a very democratic system. We have a system that is based on the rule of law.
They speak to the heart of the nation for the nation.
Simu imeleta mambo mingi sana. Mimi hata nataka ifungwe kabisa, na ifungwe hata WhatsApp na Facebook zifungwe kabisa.
When facts get lost in all these words, we aim for the truth. Join me, Dennis Omondi, every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. as I serve you the news and speak to your leaders and their observers to establish nothing but the truth, only on KUTV.
Focus on Health is a show that creates awareness on matters health and informs you on various diseases, their causes, treatment, prevention, coping, and support. So join me, Boari Michelle, every Thursday at 7:30 p.m. only on KUTV. You can also follow us on our social media platforms at KUTV Focus on Health on Facebook and also on YouTube, and Health Focus on Instagram, because your health is your wealth. Stay safe and stay healthy.
Kipindi hewani ni mitindo ya kipwani. Kama ilivyo kipindi hiki kinahusu nyimbo za taarab, chakacha, midwara, midundiko, bila kusahau mapishi ambao ndio uti wa mgongo wa pwani ya Afrika Mashariki.
Jamani, swaibu zangu mliopo maskani, hatuonani wenzangu, najua mwanitamani.
Hapa Kutv, nahodha mwendesha chombo cha baharini, yani ua linalunukia na kuvutia waridi tamu.
Welcome back. You're watching Law Matters. We're looking into the issues of Kenya child health rights and what we're doing as a government and parents to ensure the implementation of those particular rights. In our first segment, we focused on the preamble, the legal framework surrounding that, but now we'll be looking into the practicable examples of what is being done here in the country. Now, Lawyer Nyokabi, when we look into the issues of enforcement, as a country we have mostly focused on statistics to say that children maybe in the northern part of the country are facing malnutrition and what have you, or we are having mortality cases in the urban slums compared to people from, posh neighborhood. But what are some of the institutions that are there in the country to ensure the enforcement of health rights to children, given that you've said that it is immediate, it's not supposed to be progressive, it is immediate?
So I think the first is under the current Children Act, the new Children Act, they're supposed to be operationalized secretariat, they call the Secretary of Children's Services. Mm-hmm. And that body is supposed to monitor how the Department of Children's Services, which is now currently under the executive, is supposed to be ensuring that the rights of children are implemented, respected, protected. Right now, people colloquially refer to them just as children officers. Yeah. So whenever you go to a public institution, maybe to a public administration institution, then you are referred to the children's office. So that's usually a good point of call, because if there's any neglect of a child or a child who probably needs a healthcare service and maybe a parent is not around, that children officer knows usually what to do. They can approach the court to be able to make an order for purposes of treatment of the child or any other intervention, for example, if a child is in need of care and protection. And also, we've got a children's court now that the scope of the court has actually really been expanded. Okay. So far, the utilization of this has really been through a lot of NGOs, so a child themselves can actually approach somebody to, help them go to court for purposes of obtaining an order, maybe if they need something. But this hasn't been very used a lot. It could be a question of ignorance. It could be a question because, or maybe the parent maybe does not want a child to get a certain healthcare service. That question is still up in the air because we don't have proper statistics on that. But right now, especially under the current legal framework, enforcement mechanisms are really there. What we need to do is utilize them more. Both the children court as well as now what is good to call the Secretary of Children's Services. We need to be able to utilize that more and ensure that the children's rights are actually being respected, or at least are being realized to the fullest extent. Right. Yes.
Talking about enforcement, recently in the country, I think months ago, we had the Shakahola cases, and there was issue of children's rights being violated. In this particular case, health rights had been violated because they were not being given access to healthcare. We have also had cases in eastern Kenya where, due to religious beliefs, children are being they're not having access to immunization because the parents believe that immunization is a Western culture, it's against their religious belief, and again it goes to denying a child the access. What does the penal code say concerning this, given that health rights has stipulated that there should be access?
Okay. So in terms of protection, so they're not found just in the penal code. We actually have various acts. So for example, under harmful cultural beliefs, for example, where you fail to immunize your child, and not because of a health reason, because of a harmful belief that you hold, actually the Children Act has a criminal provision for that. Okay. And you can actually be tried and sent to jail if it's shown that your neglect is actually causing the child harm. Beyond that, for harmful cultural practices, others like what you mentioned around the FGM, we actually have an act that provides for a framework for punishment for people who perform harmful cultural practices. So the Penal Code doesn't quite speak about children. Most of that are found within the Children Act, various other acts. We've even got the Sexual Offences Act, for example, where a child is defiled. So defilement is what we call rape, but now rape for a child who's under the age of 18, and provides a very strict punishment framework for people who commit sexual assault or sexual offences against children. So that already, the criminal courts will come into play. And those are crimes. So you'd actually, the police will investigate, the director of public prosecution shall make a decision to charge if your child will be taken through a trial, and you'll be jailed if you're found guilty. So the criminal legal framework is quite strict. But again, we still do see certain of these harmful practices or the violence, and this could be in part a societal issue around how we treat our children. So there's the International Human Rights Framework usually talks about, even when you have a criminal law framework for punishment of people who violate children's rights, you still have to have a social aspect of educating the public, ensuring that children's rights are not being affected by harmful cultural beliefs. A good example of this is around, for one, immunization. The Ministry of Health will actually will do, you've seen it, where they do children, the drives, they go like door to door. And part of that is that they actually give you education, and they tell whoever they find in the house, this is the vaccination we're giving, or this is the immunization we're giving, and this is the reason. That increase of knowledge is actually a state responsibility to ensure that children's rights to health are respected. Otherwise, we'll have situations where people are not allowing their children to get the vaccination. So you see, there's that social aspect where you sort of need to deal with, even as you're taking care of the criminal law provision. But I can assure you, child neglect is actually, it faces a severe penalty, and even parents can be charged with child neglect.
First time?
Yeah, I'm kind of scared, but I can do this. Mess with me. Yeah, let's do this, man.
Oh, come on. Is that your defense right now? That everyone does it, so it's okay? Shouldn't you do better if you know better? That's just so twisted.
That's just words.
These are not just words. It's a code that you used to live by and follow.
I want to make sure that you understand that my wife is off limits.
Sure, but are you telling me this? Go tell her.
Because I think you need to hear it.
Vijana wote, twende wote, kina baba, kina kuwa jamii ya kuhamahama, na sasa kujumuisha kilimo katika mitindo yao ya maisha. Kwenye toleo la kaunti ya Narok, hii ni Boresha Kilimo, kwani afya bora ni kilimo bora.
Kwani kilimo ndicho huboresha maisha.
Kaka mtazamaji, popote ulipo unapokuwa ukitazama Safina Show,
inang'oananga sasa hivi. Ungana nami Albanas Mwania, nahodha wa Safina Show, nikutoe ng'ambo ya pili hadi ufuoni. Safina Show, sauti ya matumaini.
Oh, come on. Is that your defense right now? That everyone does it so it's okay? Shouldn't you do better if you know better? That's just so twisted.
That's just words.
These are not just words. It's a code that you used to live by and follow.
I want to make sure that you understand that my wife is off limits.
Sure, but are you telling me this? Go tell her.
Because I think you need to hear it.
Vijana hoye!
They speak to play politics.
Kila mara yeye ananiwinda kama mnyama. Naambia yeye Mungu iko. Mungu iko na sitarudi nyuma.
They speak words strong enough to change policy and the law.
We have a very democratic system. We have a system that is based on the rule of law.
They speak to the heart of the nation for the nation.
Simu imeleta mambo mingi sana. Mimi hata nataka ifungwe kabisa, na ifungwe hata WhatsApp na Facebook zifungwe kabisa.
When facts get lost in all these words, we aim for the truth. Join me, Dennis Omondi, every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. as I serve you the news and speak to your leaders and their observers to establish nothing but the truth, only on KUTV.
Ready to kickstart your day with the most exciting morning show around. Tune in to our dynamic and entertaining program where we keep you informed, engaged, and entertained from the moment you wake up.
From breaking news and current events to music, fun, and out of the ordinary stories, we've got you covered with a mix of interviews, games, and special segments. You never know what's in store.
Join us every Monday morning
and Tuesday morning
for a fun and fascinating way to start your day.
Don't miss out on the action.
Tune in now and experience the excitement for yourself.
Only on KUTV Rise Today from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m.
Start your day
with us.
What are some of the ways through which you can develop these skills so that you are comfortably fitting into the job?
You have to put yourself in positions where you are uncomfortable in the sense that you are not clear about what to do.
Because I used to work a corporate job before. So when I left, I happened to visit someone's farm around this area. So this project is called Security Breach Detector 100 Can Familiarize.
People of lower socioeconomic status at government cost.
Okay. Now, when you look into the issues surrounding teenage pregnancies. Of course, in most family setups, when your teenage daughter is pregnant, parents tend to be angry. They want to show their anger in ways that violate the health right of a child. We have had cases of children being chased away from their homes. They are told, go back to the man who made you pregnant. We have had cases of those children who are in children's homes. They don't have access to nutrition. What does the law say concerning protecting this particular group, given that they need more support in terms of mental health issue support, in terms of physical issue support and access to nutrition? What does the law say surrounding that?
So, first, what the law says about violence. And the reason I'm framing it within violence is that we must remember that if a teenager gets pregnant, they probably got that pregnancy from an adult.
Yeah.
Children cannot consent to sex. So that's sexual violence. And that's where we must start from. The International Human Rights Framework tells us that sexual violence is a form of discrimination. And the reason for this is because we know that women are the ones who face more sexual violence than men. So we have to see it through this frame. If you look at the statistics of sexual violence in Kenya, in fact, KDHS starts it at 15 I think to 18.
Yeah.
So when you have a parent who's angry, I assert that that's not the right response. Because that child has probably faced some form of violence, and that's what you need to get to the root for. Now, where the child chooses that they're going to continue the pregnancy, then that child will probably need additional healthcare support, and that's what needs to be provided. Under the law, we call the National Guidelines for the Management of Sexual Violence. There are certain provisions of in terms of what a child who has undergone violence should be able to access. I'm sure you've seen the statistics around teenage girls who get pregnant by way of defilement, and then they end up having to choose unsafe procedures to terminate the pregnancy, and then they die. That's a situation that should not be happening, because the national guidelines actually give us a framework for provision of post-rape care, and part of that actually includes access to a safe and legal abortion if the child needs it, or if the child consents to it, or if they want it. But that's, like I've said, just with the question of the decision making, they have to be able to be consulted, and then a decision is made in the best interest of that child. So chasing the child away to whoever has impregnated them, that's not the right framing. So we need to address what the root cause, and here it's a sexual violence. Of course, I am aware that there are those relationships. Maybe a 16-year-old could have a relationship with another 16-year-old.
So there's two.
Yes, and what the law has said is that in those cases, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution has what we call a diversion policy, where there are no coercive circumstances. Then part of what is provided is counseling for those children. So they don't go through the criminal law process. But what the police and the DPP usually have to make sure that there are no coercive circumstances, so circumstances that could amount to rape. And in that case, then they're actually referred to counseling. And I know that this procedure actually has been going on for a while. It's part of the Children Act now, but it was actually initially pioneered by the Director of Public Prosecutions because of the influx of these cases. But we are still not dealing with the issue around sexual violence, and Article 27 talks about discrimination. We need to think about that. But even where the pregnancy has happened, maybe the parent does not want to pursue, who did what, they just want their child to be taken care of, there is actually, the legal framework is the same. This child is still entitled to healthcare services that fit within the framework. We've just talked about the AAAQ framework. The state must ensure that all the social determinants of health, does this child have resources to continue education? Because this is probably a child who was in school. They must be able to continue their education to the extent that is possible, whether it's within the pregnancy or even beyond, after they have given birth. Is the child who's born, are they going to have access to issues such as, their own immunization? To what extent is the child also ensuring that there's no repeat pregnancy. That's something that's very important, and that's part of the healthcare package that will probably be offered to this teenager. And on top of that, now the social determinants, they must be able to get food, adequate water, a house of acceptable standard, and like I've mentioned, education, so they're able to continue their life. Yeah.
Okay, now because of time, what happens when the person causing neglect in terms of access to healthcare services is a parent? How can the child get an avenue to advocate for his or her rights, given that the person who's supposed to protect is the one violating?
So unfortunately, we don't have, like in the States here, where we have emancipated minors who go for, the emancipation, yeah? But like I've said, that the Department of Children's Services is fairly strong in this. A child themselves, depending on the kind of avenues that are available to him, so avenues, I mean, like, where are they located? Are they located maybe next to their area chief? They can actually go and make a report against the neglect. So for example, if neglect is, the child is sick and is never taken to the hospital, or the child is not being allowed to attend school, those are things that are really frowned upon now, and those kind of child neglect cases are extremely high. The good thing, I think, is because we also have our social setting the way it is. Children, it is rare to find a child not accessing certain services unless that child is completely being neglected, and parents are routinely being called out for not taking their children to hospital or not taking their children to school. So the law provides this framework, and I've talked about like the children court. The children court can actually compel healthcare provision, social services provision. The court can actually compel. And something that is important to note is that the law actually allows for that extension of that parental responsibility, because then the responsibility is on the parent, right? That extension can actually happen on application of the child to the court. So beyond the age of 18, if a child still needs access to schooling or access to certain forms of healthcare, the child can actually go to court, make a case for themselves, and in certain instances, the court can allow such an application.
All right. Thank you, Akilu, for that particular perspective. Because of time, we are taking our final break, but once we return, we'll be having quite an interesting segment. We'll be having the question and answer session from our audience. Do stay with us.
What are some of the ways through which you can develop these skills so that you are comfortably fitting into the job? You have to put yourself in positions where you are uncomfortable in the sense that you are not clear about what to do.
Because I used to work a corporate job before. So when I left, I happened to visit someone's farm around this area. So this project is called the Security Breach Detect and Returns Familiarize. It is meant to be used to detect, detonate explosive.
We'll tackle all the tough issues, discuss all the weird moments, and hopefully share a few laughs along the way.
Is that your defense right now? That everyone does it so it's okay? Shouldn't you do better if you know better? That's just so twisted.
That's just words.
These are not just words. It's a code that you used to live by and follow.
I want to make sure that you understand that my wife is off limits.
Sure, but are you telling me this? Go tell her.
Because I think you need to hear it.
Thank you for staying with us. You're watching Law Matters. Tonight you're having an interesting conversation concerning children's health rights. And this is the final segment of this particular discussion, having the question and answer session from our audience. Now, what we'll do, you'll get to say your name, ask your question. I'll first take the first 3 questions and then we'll have the second round.
My name is Alex, and my question was, apart from privatization of healthcare, what are the major hurdles that you would say are incumbent in achieving the children's healthcare and their rights being observed. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
My name is Kelvin, and my question...
Yes, Kelvin?
My name is Kelvin, and my question is on the challenges that the children face, like disabled kids. You'd get a disabled kid who has gone to a hospital, and they are financially not able to provide for themselves. And at the hospital, you get that the kid is told to wait until they provide the funds, then they can be attended to. And we have been told that Section 16 of the Children's Act says that the right to children's health care should be immediate. And the healthcare providers, in this case, acting as the agents of the state, have not provided that. Is this in contravention with the Constitution, and how should this be remedied?
Thank you, Kelvin. The final question for the first round.
My name is John. I would like to seek clarification on what the government has actually put across to ensure enforcement of the healthcare situation in marginalized areas. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So, Akili, we'll have those first three questions, starting with the one from Alex.
Okay, so Alex asks, apart from privatization, what are other hurdles? There are many. We are making strides, but there are many. So one, cost is a significant factor.
Okay.
And here I'm not talking about just cost in terms of, because you can only go to a private health facility, but think about even the distance it takes to travel to a hospital. Which is what I talked about when you think about accessibility. It's not just economic accessibility, it's physical accessibility. So cost is a significant one. And sometimes cost means many women or many mothers are daily wage earners.
Yeah.
If they don't go to work that day to take the child to hospital, what does that mean?
Yeah.
So I would say cost, and when we're thinking about cost, we need to think about it from very different angles. I'd also talk about harmful social norms. Like we've just discussed about children and their opinions, but many people don't believe that children should have opinions, which now we end up now with a situation where a child's right to health in a specific service is violated because the opinion is just not being respected or even being sought. So that's a significant one. Third, I think I talk about just just a lack of knowledge or possibly ignorance. Many people will not know where to turn if a child's rights are violated. Or they don't know that children actually have a specific right. So whenever we think about like teenage pregnancies, someone will be very annoyed but not thinking about this child needs food, and then like in the case of a child who's pregnant, there are so many other interventions that are needed. Even beyond just maternal care, they probably need specialist maternal care because think about the frame of a very young person. So that lack of knowledge can actually lead even to the death of a child, and that's something significant. So sometimes there can be a feeling of helplessness for people especially who live very, very in marginalized areas, and that of course now ends up violating a child's rights. So there are many, and harmful cultural practices. We've got we've got an Anti-FGM Act, the Anti-FGM Act. We've got a Prevention of Domestic Violence Act, but those harmful cultural practices are still very prevalent. So this is even beyond now, the patriarchy that is within society. This is just about certain practices that really, really undermine the rights to health for children. So there are very many challenges. Beyond that, of course, we have to think about accessibility of healthcare services. So I know there are very many facilities even in this Nairobi that don't have adequate healthcare personnel or adequate medication. In today's paper, I challenge you to go and read it. There's a whole story about a certain kind of drug that is missing. So we really need to think about, it's not just about privatization, but we are really not doing all of it. The government is not doing all that it can. Moving on to Kelvin's question around, so the right to health has been violated. What are the remedies? We are fortunate that in our context, the right to health is justiciable. And what that means is that you can actually go to court to seek to have the right to health enforced. And we do that in a number of ways. So you can go to court as somebody whose health right has been violated and sue the person who has violated your health right. Normally it would be the state. So you can go and say the state has not provided me with a certain kind of healthcare service. And so you can actually go to court. And beyond that, because we've got a fairly vibrant civic space, citizen action is still also very important in terms of advocating for rights to health. Most of us belong to certain kinds of communities. Even children have representatives. A children officer can actually go to a court to seek a court order to compel the healthcare service to provide a health service. So that's one of the ways. Joanne has talked about enforcement. How you wanted an instance about where the right to health has been enforced. There are various. I think one of my favorite has been around maternal health care, where some women who were they were detained in hospital. You know, sometimes women from lower socioeconomic status are not able to access, cannot pay for maternal health care. They were detained. And in the judgment, they were detained with their children. And I remember with the support of a certain organization called the Center for Reproductive Rights, they went to court. And when they went to court, part of what the court said is that, especially for women of lower socioeconomic status who are detained in the context of giving birth and how they were detained, that was a violation. And actually, because that is part of what led, that kind of advocacy is what led to now these plans we see where women are allowed, are supposed to go to hospital and give birth for free. I know that it's not been a perfect model, but that's just one example. And there are very many others I can give you. I can give you some in the context of TB that my organization has worked on, but there are actually instances. So it's upon us as lawyers, as law students, to be able to know what these frameworks are and to be able to actually advocate for the enforcement.
All right. Thank you, Akili, for that. Now, I'll take the final two because we are pressed on time. Who will be first up? All right. Do we have a final question? Okay. Now, Akili, that's all from the audience. Now, finally, looking into the challenges that we're having as a nation in terms of implementation, and you've said that sometimes we have non-state actors, but they can do so much. We still have a long way to go, given that even health is a devolved function. What are some of the gaps that still as a nation we are lagging behind, and we have made so much progress in other sectors?
I think the one that we all must participate in is one in terms of governance in health. We really must hold government to account to how our funds that are intended for healthcare are being utilized. All of us are suffering right now in terms of what is being collected from us. And it's okay for those things to be collected from us as long as they are being correctly applied. So I think my final call will be let's all participate. One, I've talked about the enforcement. We are lawyers. Many of us here, I think, are lawyers. Let's work on in terms of enforcement. Let's exploit the opportunities that are available to us, both through the courts or through citizen-led action. But we must be able to hold the government accountable, because both the Constitution, our domestic law, as well as the international human rights framework, actually places the responsibility for the right to the highest attainable standard of health on the state. So even where the state is calling in non-state actors, it does not mean that it is absolving its responsibility. It only means that it is creating a space as part of its obligation to realize, but in the end, it is one with the primary responsibility. So it's actually the state to check even those non-state actors how they're behaving. But more than that, it is upon the state. It is upon us as citizens to also hold government to account. We know we keep hearing about scandals within the various state agencies. Let's try and be more involved in that kind of health governance, because that's the only way we're going to end up reaping the full benefits of our constitution.
All right. In such situations whereby we're having cases of preventable diseases like malnutrition causing the deaths of children, especially in the northern counties, and it's not a new thing. It's something that we face on a year, on an annual basis, given that we have had one of the most worst drought situation here in the country, and the state will be proactive when something has happened. How can we ensure that there's implementation of some of the measures that we have put in place, given that some of these issues recur? So we're not being ambushed as a state.
It's not a surprise.
Yeah.
Again, it's really about citizen-led action. It's about community-led action. We need to galvanize, we need to exploit. We have a fairly vibrant space for civil society. Mm-hmm. And civil society is not the NGOs, it's literally the people who are seated here today. It's us. Yeah. So we need, that's why I'm saying we need to participate more. I think so for example, when a law is being made, part of the laws actually talk about public participation. I don't know how many of us know that. We've got county governments. Health is actually a devolved function. Yeah. So where county governments decide that they're going to make maybe a county health law, to what extent are we actually participating? Mm-hmm. Are we giving our views? To what extent, when you see something going wrong in a healthcare facility, to what extent are you being able, as a lawyer, to speak up? Yeah. There's very many avenues to ensure implementation is actually going on. And in the end, I mean, we can wait for government to give it to us, but as people with this kind of knowledge, mm-hmm. we should be able to actually push for the implementation. Okay. And that's why I say that's my call to the law students. Of work to be done. Let's all participate in it.
Right. So as a parting shot, what can you say in terms of the legal loopholes that we're having in the country? Yes, we passed the 4 laws that are set to focus on the universal health coverage, but of course there are some of the gaps that we have not been able to fill in terms of legislation.
So one, it's thinking around what kind of advocacy we can also think about to ensure that the gaps are also sealed. I'm aware that in Parliament, they're supposed to be tabled certain laws that, especially around reproductive health care. Yeah. So those are opportunities where we can sort of seal. When we talk about UHC, so this is actually it's the litmus test now we are about to go into. We have got the legal framework. So unless we are actually holding government to account on that legal framework, mm-hmm. we won't know if it will work. So we have to be able to actually advocate. And then lastly, I'm a big believer in litigation, so that's one of the ways. And sometimes litigation does not have to be contentious. It's really just to hold government to account in terms of, you said you're going to do this, but you've not done this for this person. How do we seal that loophole? Mm-hmm. What kind of policy are we able to push for? Mm-hmm. Both, whether it's through the courts or even outside the courts, because advocacy goes on everywhere. Mm-hmm. And advocacy can happen from whether you're a citizen who does not necessarily have a law background, but just somebody who's a concerned party within the country. You have got that space. So let's utilize that space.
All right. Thank you, Wakili Nyakabi, for your perspective in this interesting conversation. Because you're pressed on time, we'll have to, of course, close it there. But thank you so much for making time. All right. All right, that has been Wakili Nyakabi, of course, giving us a perspective concerning children's health rights, how far we've come as a country, what we are supposed to do here in the country. And it is up to everyone Kenyans to ensure that the country is accountable in terms of implementation, given that we are paying taxes and we also have law in place to ensure that is adhered to. I've been your host, Irene Mwangi. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've been able to capture a thing or two. Have a splendid night.